Hello, guys. I think Odin's blessing is upon me because this is going to be the third attempt. A lot of stuff to unpack, and I'm going to unpack it in a random order as the inspiration comes to me. Last night, I'm taking a bath, and you know Loki, he's nosy. And I was just thinking of stuff, and I told you guys about the Strawberry Festival over on Pinterest. I'm kind of thinking, I'm not going to all this nice stuff. And Loki goes, go back to church. And I'm getting the vision of this little fox sitting at the edge of the tub looking at me. Oh, what? He says, go back to church. Get these things. And I came up with all these practical reasons why I couldn't do it. I don't have enough money to, like, feed 12 people at a social, and I don't have all this other stuff. And then I came around to the main point. I said, Loki, that would be lying. What about all these fine things I've told these people about as Lokeans were held up to a higher standard? Plenty of people go to church that don't believe. I'm thinking he's up to something. He's up to something, and he's sitting there real innocently. I'm like, you are up to something, because you always have us do the right thing. Weirdly, we're very akin in that we're always doing the right thing, but we don't do it from a sense of being bad people. It's kind of spooky how close we are, except for a couple points of theology. So I get out of the bath and I decide I'm going to look up original sin just for the heck of it. See if there's anybody that doesn't believe in original sin. Well, it turns out tons of people don't. Tons of branches of the church don't. Because you know there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different little individual churches that put their own spin on stuff. And there's this woman that wrote this book about original blessing as opposed to original sin, and I'm like, okay. So I read the free thing as far as I can read it, and it's like all those other more progressive Christian things I've read, that there's something bothering you about it, and you can't put your finger on it, probably because they all... Excuse me, one second. Okay, sorry about that. Probably because they all snap back to the Garden of Eden as a literal event. And I'm like, well, I have to respect that if I'm going to get anything out of this at all. But she's talking about a triumphal march from the garden instead of getting booted out in your butt. And this wasn't the first time I'd heard this philosophy, but I'm like, okay. But that doesn't get me any closer to the questions I've been thinking about lately, like, why don't I feel God when I go into a church? Why does it feel so cold and lonely and everything else? And Loki was just leading me in a big old circle. Because I went up at night and I'm kind of talking to God. And I'm like, well, it has to be logically some deity. There's a name for this deity. There's a historical past for this deity. I know this is a deity. It's a deity I've known all my life. I just don't know who it is. Sometimes Loki will claim it's Loki. Sometimes Odin claims it's Odin. Sometimes Freyr claims it's Freyr. I've had every god I've ever worked with stop up. And I'm doing this healing with God. I'm putting ear quotes because I have no idea who it actually is. And I start worrying about Odin. Precious tiny little Odin. What will Odin think? This will break Odin's heart. So all of a sudden the healing stops dead. Like you can feel it stop. And I start getting these pains in my leg instead. And I don't know if it's true or not, but they say if you start getting pains in your legs, it can be, provided your diet's on point, and I try, and provided you're getting exercise, and I try, that might be a sign you're feeling held back. And I'm like, okay, where am I feeling held back? And I'm like, I always feel held back by Odin. I feel like if I wasn't worried about Odin's precious, tiny, little, fragile male ego, hey, I would be off exploring this with both barrels, and I would be doing all this stuff. So to compound things, I can't sleep, and I can't sleep because I'm struggling with who is God and da-da-da, and I'm struggling with cranky Odin, feeling like cranky Odin, and I'm struggling with this pain in my leg, and I just felt miserable, and I couldn't sleep, and my arthritis kicked up. So I hardly slept. Then I got up early this morning, and went back to bed. And I had this dream, and the voodoo law showed up in my dream. And I'm sitting in this chair. I swear to the gods we're going somewhere with this. Your patience will be rewarded. I'm sitting in the chair opposite this one. I'm sitting kind of side saddle, like facing to the side. And my dad is putting stuff up in a cabinet for me. Now, my dad was there. My mom, I think, was in the living room. And the Baron Samdi's standing here. And the garbage can, for somehow, is not there, but then it's there and it's all white. But then it's colored the way I colored it with all the sparkle paint. Because it's a dream. And I had two purses. I had one I thought was my friend's purse, and then I'm like really digging into this dream, and I'm thinking it's like a metaphor for something, but it had black handles, real fancy material, obviously a little haute couture purse, and it was brand new, and it was just like waiting to be filled, but it was totally empty. So I put that on the ground. And on the other side, I have a knit purse, and it's all these beautiful Rastafarian colors. And I am taking stuff out of this purse. And the first thing I take out of this purse is kind of like his food offering. And I'm like, that has to be bad. That's from years ago. And I know I'm dreaming. And I'm like, well, am I seeing this stuff because, I went through TV and art and I took down all these photos? Is this just that coming out into my conscious or what? But I throw that away, though. I tease my dad and I say, you're going to be getting some of this if you're not careful. And I start pulling through this purse, this Rastafarian purse, and I'm taking out all these things like Halloween themed stuff. Like there's this, how they have those Halloween eggs now? At least they do in this country. And you get like bubble gum or something out of them. Well, they had those. Like they're made out of plastic, guys, and you slide them if you don't have them in your country. And when you slide them, the mouth opens and you like can take out gumballs or candy or whatever's in there. And so they have one with 3 cats, something, and that's either for Izzy Frida or something. And there was like a pink angel going up there. That's like the one I have over here. And that one could have been for Frida or Danto or Maman Brigitte. And I didn't know it were the Ludon Loa showing up to say you've put us away in this cabinet. Or are they saying they want this cabinet? And that's where the dream ended. So I get up and I'm like actually talking to them. I said, if you want the cabinet, you can have it. I don't know what you're talking about. And the gods aren't being helpful. I'm like, do they want something from out in the garage? What is this they're talking about? What do they want? And none of the gods are helping. So I find a podcast by that chick. And in the meantime, I had did 2 different versions of this video for you guys, and neither one was hitting it. And I'm listening to the podcast of this chick is the second version of this video is processing, and it's not processing, and it's not processing. And I'm listening to her podcast, and I'm really listening to her. And I'm like, this is still Christianity, it's just Christianity light. It's original blessing. Yes. But then she goes, oh, then you have to think more of sin. I'm like, wait, what? And she starts talking in this weird way that Christians have when they talk to each other, like they must have a telepathic connection, because they start talking about gambling and movies and music and everything, and I'm like, do they still do this thing, or do they think this is sinful? And I get the basic concept of wanting to be better people and wanting to avoid things you think drag you down or drag you away from a relationship with the gods or God or Jesus or whomever. I get that. That's a basic human tenet, and it went from her talking about original blessing to talking about sin to talking about God's always with us and God always loves us and we don't have to seek God out because he's literally with us right now, but there are all these bad things we do and we have to keep making up to God. I'm like, that's basic Christianity. You really didn't change anything. We do wrong things as well, but it's not like if we did a wrong thing and died, Odin would kick our ass for us. He would not be happy with us, and perhaps Loki would not be bemused depending on what the last thing we did before we died. But it's not like there's hellfire waiting for us. And she's kind of taken out the concept of hellfire for the Christians, but it's still this strange relationship where they kind of have to watch what they do. And they kind of have to watch what they think. And I'm like, we don't even know where human thoughts come from, so good luck with that. And they kind of have to watch how they act. And it's kind of like it came around to, I'm listening to it, kind of open-minded while I'm doing all this Pinterest. And all of a sudden, all this free stuff starts to come out. And it sounded like, as far as I could get out of it, the whole reason they're doing good stuff is so that they please their God, and their God doesn't abandon them, even though he's not going to abandon them. And I'm like, my head's starting to hurt. And Freya's response was, you want to know who was talking to you at the festival? I knew it was Freya. Freya talked about this over on Patreon. And do you want to know who, like, keeps coming into the church and looking around? And, you know, do you want to know this and that? He's like, you've had your gods with you all this time, but we're not putting this thing on you of sin. Our gods don't have a concept of sin. Some people are trying to move it into paganism. They are, and I think it's rather strange. We don't have this concept of people being basically bad. We have a concept, whatever our personal beliefs are. I think people are basically good, but I think sometimes we're basically neutral too, and we could go either way. And of course there are bad things we do and there are good things we do. And we know the difference. We know it's bad to hurt other people, unless they're like breaking into our house. And we know it's good to help other people, and that's really all we have to know. We're good to go. And if we do something wrong, yes, we should apologize to that person and we should apologize to the gods, but it shouldn't have to be this, you have to do this or else God's going to get you thing. And that's the difference between us and them. It shouldn't be, if you don't do this thing, Odin's going to punish you, or if you don't do this thing, Loki's going to set your house on fire. It shouldn't have to be, you're only going to behave because if you don't, the gods are going to get you. It was kind of an interesting podcast because the gods were using it to point out, well, look at what they're talking about. And she destroyed this idea of prosperity gospel. And prosperity gospel is the more you make God happy, the more God will give you stuff. Like if you make God happy enough, he'll cure your cancer or give you $1 million or whatever. And she pointed out how flawed that was, and she had a point. I'm with her on that, and I think we do that same thing with our gods, that the more you please the gods and kind of suck up to them, and you're the perfect little pagan or Lokean or whatever, we think they owe us something. And that's not how it works out. In their religion, as she pointed out, Jesus was the only perfect human according to them, because Jesus was God, and this is where I call unfair. But he should have been living, as she said, in a castle and roses and rich and everything, and he should have never had to go to the crucifixion and all this other stuff. I'm like, that's a really sad belief system you got there, but you enjoy it, you have fun. And I think Loki just wanted me to see that as many dressings as they put on Christianity, and as much as she decided to start studying Buddhism too, and start taking Taekwondo and studying ninjas and all this other stuff, they seem to be kind of strangely naive. Because I'm like, I don't remember that being a basic tenet of theology. She studies it and tries to put it back into a Christian perspective, and it's like they're trying to be the cool kids so that everyone goes and becomes a Christian, and I'm like, that sounds vaguely unwholesome. I don't know why, but it sounds vaguely unwholesome, like you're trying to trick people into becoming a Christian. And then they can be saddled with this idea of, oh, they have this blessing from God forever, and God's forever with them. Yeah, if they make God mad, God's mad. And I'm like, you people have a strange religion. Where basically, for Lokeans, we always have a relationship with Loki, unless he goes on walkabout, which he usually doesn't do, though sometimes he does because he's Loki. He will ask us for things, and he will point us in the right direction. But he's never going to say, you sinned, you were a bad person. He's going to say, you really screwed that one up. I think you better see what you can do to fix it. And we don't have that weight, because I start to feel this like spiritual weight start to press on me the more and more I listen to this podcast. And strangely, that's when all the Freya stuff came up, because remember the kind of gods they are. And they were like, you don't have to put this weight on you. This is not your weight. We know you're trying to find this lost god and give this god a home and pat this god on the head and be really nice because it's just your nature. It's, you know, as a person that likes to heal stuff and everything. But they said, you know, there's no saving a lost cause. They've invented this strange god, and the gods were pointing out they've invented this strange god that... even at his nicest, even when they're saying he's always with you, there's always these strings and conditions. Our gods don't have strings and conditions with us. They want us to be basically good people, but it has to be by our definition of good. And there's no guilt or shame heaped on us. And there's no concept of original sin, because there was never a concept of sin. Can we make the gods mad? Well, yes, depending on the god you're working with. If you're working with Freyr, you probably don't want to go and start a garbage dump and start putting toxic waste into the ground. That's probably not going to work too well. And if you're working with Odin, you probably don't want to start doing things that are unjust and unkind and disrupting the social order around you, because he is a god of like keeping everything together. And if you're working with Loki, you don't want to just go off and be an idiot because Loki. They will all bring you back to task, but it's not from that concept of you're a bad human being. It's from what you were doing is not helping you or anyone else. You have to get back on track. So I think that's what Loki wanted to lead me to. I think that's why he suggested the church thing, because he knew I would go out and he knew I would look for information. He knows me all too well. He just has to dangle the bait and I bite and I go and I look. And as far as I can see, all he was pointing out was, look, they're always going to have this heavy kind of cloak of sin on them, whether they say it doesn't matter or they do. It's that guilt you can feel when you start listening to a Christian speaker long enough. This guilt just floods your soul, especially if you were raised Catholic and you just feel down and sad. And in Pinterest, Freyr and Freya were answering me, and Loki was answering me, and Odin was answering me. As I'm listening to this podcast, I'm getting like the best, most epic pins ever. And it was like, one of us is your God. Don't worry about us. One of us was one of the ones you prayed to God. And they've all claimed to be God. And they were like, you don't have to go try to make up with the boogeyman. You don't have to go try to make up with the boogeyman and then start wondering, can I listen to this song? Can I do this? Can I do that? Because that's the kind of life they're leading. They're talking very happily about not watching certain kinds of media because of the thoughts it might put in your head. I'm like, yeah, you don't want to be free thinkers. But, the only advice, for contrast, the only advice Argos have ever given me is like, hey, if you watch way too many creepypastas because they tend to be down and negative in their energy, you tend to get down and negative in your energy. There's nothing inherently wrong with listening to creepypastas if you can get the ones that are like neutral. You know what I mean? Some of them are just real downers. They're like, you could listen to that all day, but it just doesn't seem to do you any good. It's not because they deal with the horror genre, they're inherently bad. It's like that just seems to bring you down. Just like listening to these Christian people on these podcasts seems to bring you down. Why don't you knock it off? And that was the only thing. It wasn't chase another god out of our patch. It was, this stuff makes you feel bad. If it made you feel great, you could have all of it you wanted. But you were raised Catholic, and you're just hearing, probably maybe as a Catholic, you're just hearing sin, 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 sin. Don't listen to rock music, don't go gamble, don't do all this stuff. And I have gods that specialize in these things, and I'm like, I know where I belong. I belong with our pagan gods. But every so often, Loki's going to trot us, I think, back into the past and say, this is what you're missing? This? Being told you can't do this, being told you can't do that. And obviously, if you would walk up to any of these podcast people and you would say, well, if God saved us and there is no original sin, they still have the concept of sin. You would say, well, what do you think of being a witch? Or what do you think of having 30 other gods? And they will probably whip out the Bible and throw holy water on you or something. Some Christians won't. There are a few churches where they don't even know, and everybody, including the atheists, can go because they don't know. I'm like, that's kind of church for me. They don't know. That's their biggest theological triumph. I don't know. Like, well, at least they're honest. But it was a thing Loki wanted me to look into. Because Loki doesn't believe we're essentially bad. He doesn't believe we're essentially sinful. He doesn't care what we listen to or what we watch or anything else, as long as we remain good people in our own definition, and that's a sticky part. Being pagan means that we really don't have any leadership, even though there are people that would love to be our leadership and teach us what to think and see and do and what we can watch, and we don't have that. We have absolute freedom, and that can be kind of scary sometimes, because especially if you came from a religion where, you would have some leader saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you must do this, you must do that. We have to make all those decisions on our own, and sometimes it can be kind of scary to have unlimited freedom. But Loki was like, you people know if you're doing right or wrong. You feel bad when you've done something wrong, and sometimes you don't have a reason to feel bad. You just feel bad, and you can go to Loki and talk to him about that. But he was like, you're not going back there. All this sin stuff, all this stuff about you can't watch that video, or you can't watch this video, or you can't go gamble, or you can't do VR, certain types of VR. She didn't get into the VR, but he's pointing out, he's like, these people haven't changed their tune in 2,000 years. They're trying to take it out of the idea of original sin, but really they still have the sin. They've just gotten rid of the idea that they're inherently evil. They maybe vaguely think they're inherently good, but then they didn't, and she changed her story, and they were neither bad nor good. They're human. I'm like, well, that's really inspirational. You're not good. You've moved from evil to neutral. That's great. So that took care of that curiosity, but I think I was Loki leading me on a long, winding journey to say, here, we're going to go look at this together, and you can listen, and the gods will pop up in your pins. He didn't say that part, but the gods popped up in the pins to say, hey, we love you as you are. You don't have to go to church. Obviously, as a pagan, you don't have to go to church unless you really want to. You don't have to worry about if everything you do is good or bad, or you're going to upset some god somewhere. And I think that's what the dream was about as well, if I mentioned the dream. It was just, look, you've given us all these blessings and gifts in the past. We're giving them back to you now. You have all the family you need. You have all the gods you need. You don't have to go chasing this, well, basically the boogeyman god dressed up in a new, shinier outfit. It's still the boogeyman god, is what it is. It's still the boogeyman god that if you do a wrong thing or you do what they consider sinful, and they all can't agree on what's sinful, then boogeyman god's mad at you, and you have to keep making up and keep making up and keep making up. And she really never got to what happens if you die on a mess up. I have no idea, but it's probably not good. I know what it would have been in Catholic. Catholic, it would have been, uh-oh, because we got rid of purgatory. Guess where you're going? But with our gods, they're like, we don't have that concept in our afterlife, whether you're dealing with the Norse gods or you're dealing with other gods. It's usually not that kind of concept. So I hope that helped. I know that was kind of long, but it was, I think our gods were pointing out we don't need to feel that obligation to go over and try to rescue their god, even though sometimes I think we do. And we don't have to feel the obligation to try to make nice with their gods because we're pagans and we try to make nice with all the gods. It's just the culture around their god has been, for 2,000 years, it's been this really negative culture. And if you can separate the god from the religion, we're free to try to do as we want. But when even the best people are still putting out poison wells, we've been on that concept for a while, then sometimes you just have to throw your hands up at some point and go, I've tried, but you people make this so hard. I'm not taking in a deity that comes with all this emotional baggage and all this, oh yes, I'm always with you and I love you unconditionally, but if you do these things, then you make me really sad and upset. And no, we have to deal with enough with our gods. We don't need that too. So, I know that was kind of like Paganism 101, but it was something timely, I think, because Loki knows that my friends have kind of been leaning on me and kind of dangling stuff in front of me, and he's like, well, that's not fair, that's not just, that's not a Christian way to be, and it's not. When the pagan god has to point out that the Christians are doing a bad job of it. So, if you guys like what you see, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.